Chapter 23. The bank loomed in front of them imperiously, the multi-level building mocking them with its sheer size. "Well, it is certainly the biggest bank I've ever seen in person," Jay remarked dryly as they walked up the steps and entered the building. "I wonder if it's their headquarters or something." Lexie shrugged and steered them towards an open counter. "Hello, we need to speak with someone about an old account," she began politely while putting her passport on the counter. "May I inquire as to how old the account in question might be?" The bank teller in front of them was a rather well-built man who spoke in perfect English. "The account would have been opened over 20 years ago, and I believe hasn't been accessed in around 18 years. He nodded politely and picked up the phone. "Let me get the manager for you. She handles all matters concerning old accounts of that nature." He spoke quietly into the handset before he hung up. "The manager will be right up if you would please step to the side while I help the next person in line," he said, pointing to the end of the counter. Lexie retrieved her passport, and they moved over to the position he had indicated. They stopped and looked around the interior, marking everything in their minds. Both found their eyes drawn to the various exits and the fastest ways to get to each of them from the back. Almost subconsciously, they were coming up with plans on how they would escape from this part of the building if they needed to. A stylish woman in 3-inch heels, a light blue blouse and a black skirt approached them, a pleasant smile on her face. She had her hair pulled back in a bun with long strands left to hang free at the front, framing her face. "I am Rynette, the manager here. I was told that you need some help with an old account." She began in a way of greeting, stopping in front of them. "Nice to meet you, I'm Lexie. Yes, I was told that my parents had an account here years ago before they died," Lexie told her as she stepped forward, taking the lead for them. A hint of a frown flashed across her face as her eyes flickered to the teller they had been speaking with before. It only occurred to them then that the man hadn't even bothered to check if the account they were looking for even existed. "I understand. I will see if I can help you then. Please follow me to my office and we shall see what can be done for you." She turned on her heel and walked away, not bothering to look over her shoulder as they were expected to follow her. She stepped into a clear glass office and held the door open for them. "Please have a seat," she offered, stepping around the desk and sitting in front of them. "Thank you," Lexie said as they sat. Rynette smiled at them before speaking. "Now tell me, do you know when your parents had their account here, and can I have their names?" "Certainly, their names were Michelle and Adam Thomas. They were killed in a fire 18 years ago. We were told that they had an account here at the time," Lexie told her confidently, praying that what she had just said was true. Rynette's fingers danced across her keyboard as Lexie spoke. "Do you have your birth certificate or passport so I can verify that you are indeed related to them?" Her fingers stilled as she looked at her screen. "Actually, if you have any official identification period, that will suffice in this case." She spun her monitor around so they could see what was on the screen. She noticed their eyes flick to the monitor and then back to her, understanding quickly what the problem was. "Sorry, I forgot. You probably don't read French." She apologized as she turned the monitor back around. Lexie rolled her eyes and replied in a bland tone, "No, we don't. Sorry." Rynette laughed at her response and continued. "It's not a problem. It says that their daughter Alexis, you." She stared pointedly at Lexie. "Also, have access to the account. You would have only been a young child at the time, but they seem to have had you added to the account." "Oh. Well, that is good news and should make things easier for us then," Lexie told her enthusiastically as she pulled out her passport and slid it across the desk to Rynette. Rynette accepted the offered passport and opened it to the page with Lexie's information. She quickly but thoroughly looked the information over, comparing it with what was listed on her computer. "Well, you appear to be who you say you are," she acknowledged with a slight professional smile. "Now what would you like to do?" Rynette asked as she returned Lexie's passport. Well, Lexie floundered. What kind of account did they have? I guess that would be the first thing I need to know. Reinette's hand moved over her keyboard as she pulled up the requested information. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw the new information. It appears that your parents had nearly all of our services. They had checking and savings accounts, a managed stock portfolio, as well as several safety deposit boxes. Several boxes. How many is several? Lexie asked, her mind hitting on what they had been hoping for. 5 to be exact. And from what I am seeing, all of them are our large boxes. Also, all accounts are in good standing, and since you were listed on them already at the time of your parents' death, they are still active. The boxes have not been touched since the last time they were opened by your parents. Reinette explained, reading the information on the account. Then that is where we want to start, Lexie asserted. We want to see what they had stored in the safety deposit boxes. I don't have keys or anything. Is that going to be a problem? Reinette laughed lightly at her question. No, it will not be a problem. That is for a different kind of safe deposit box. We do not use a key-based system here. We use fingerprinting and individual-based identification procedures for each of the secure boxes that your parents had. Since you are listed on the account, then your parents would have had your information in the system. Consider it one last verification process. I understand. In that case, we would like to go see them, if we may? Lexie wondered, standing from her chair. Certainly. Would you like any of the other information on the account before we leave? Reinette inquired, hesitating to stand just yet. Is there anything I need to know? Lexie asked, puzzled. Well, most people would like to know how much money they had been left, I imagine, Reinette told them with a smirking smile. She enjoyed talking to people who obviously weren't after their parents' money. Lexie sank back into the seat. I suppose that is true. Sorry, we were focused on something else. Very well then, how much money did my parents leave me? Reinette sat up straighter, clearly pleased to be asked the question she had been waiting for. I am happy to tell you that you are a rather rich woman. There are a few thousand euros in checking, and just under $500,000 in the savings account. That is not counting the worth of their stock portfolio either, which is rather sizable. She divulged to them, shocking them into silence. How much did you say there was in the savings account? Lexie asked, stuttering. To be more precise. Reinette leaned closer to her monitor. $397,542 and some change. Their original amount has been accruing interest for the last 18 years after all. Jay watched as Lexie digested what she had been told. That amount of money was a lot to take in by itself. But she was also being told that there were 5 boxes, hopefully full of information, just waiting for them. He couldn't imagine what was going through her mind at that moment. Lexie rose, deciding to ignore everything else for now. I'll think about all of that later. For now, we would like to see the boxes. Reinette stood, somewhat disappointed to have gotten such a muted and in-control reaction. Very well, if that is what you want, then we can go to the back right now. Reinette led them from her office and down the hall. She took them into a secured portion at the back of the bank, and then into a large room. Countless steel doors of varying sizes with no visible keyholes lined the wall on 2 sides, extending all the way up to the ceiling. The wall opposite them was flat steel, with no visible lines anywhere. In the middle of the room, there stood 2 pedestals. Reinette stood in front of one of them and motioned for Lexie to stand in front of the other. Please stand in front of the pedestal and place both of your hands on the indicated location. She explained to her. Reinette placed a card firmly into her own pedestal and then placed her hands palm down on the sensor at the top. Lexie rubbed her palms on her pants before placing them on the sensor. The top of the pedestal flashed red 5 times, followed by a long green flash. Reinette took her hands off the pedestal after it flashed green and pulled out some wet wipes, holding some out to Lexie as she did. You can remove your hands now. It is finished. she told Lexie, seeing that she still had her hands on the pedestal. "Oh, thank you," Lexie faltered, taking the proffered wipes, cleaning her hands. "What now?" "Now we wait. It is unlocking the boxes in your account now," Reinette finished saying, as 5 doors near the bottom of the opposite wall appeared. They were pushed away from the wall and then clicked open. "There you go." She slid her card out of the pedestal. "I will be taking my leave now, so you can have your privacy. If you need me for anything, please push this button here and I will be along shortly," she told them, indicating a circular button inset in the wall next to the door. "Thank you for everything." Lexie gratefully thanked Reinette again as she opened the door. "It has been a pleasure to help you. If you would stop by my office when you are finished, I will provide you with some documents for your account and other holdings here." Reinette offered them one last smile before leaving them alone. The click-clacking of her heels in the hall grew distant before the door had fully closed. "They have an interesting system in place here," Jay remarked, moving next to the pedestal for the first time. "This can't be a normal bank. How much to think it must have cost to put a system like this in place and keep it up to date?" he asked curiously, moving his hands over the smooth lines of the pedestal before moving to the wall and running his hands across the equally smooth wall. "This is incredible. I can't see or even feel where the doors might be. It's completely smooth." Lexie moved to the wall standing next to him and, following his example, felt the wall with her fingertips. "You're right, I can't tell where the doors might be." Her curiosity about the wall sated. She left his side and walked over to where the 5 doors had appeared and been pushed partially open. Opening them fully in turn, she pulled the boxes halfway out of each. "Let's start going through each of these," Lexie suggested, grabbing Jay's attention and causing him to blush slightly at having forgotten why they were there in the first place. "Right, sorry about that." Jay moved to her side and pulled one of the boxes the rest of the way out. Working together, they opened the top of the large box and pulled out the folders that completely filled it. Paying extra attention to keep everything in order, Jay arranged them on the floor within easy reach. Then he sat on the cold but clean floor with his back against one of the pedestals. Opening the first folder, he started flipping through the papers inside. Immediately, he found something of interest. "Come here, check this out." Jay motioned for Lexie to join him on the floor. "These all appear to be reports written by your parents. It doesn't say who the recipient was meant to be, though." "Well, they worked for the CIA," Grandpa said. Lexie moved the papers in question closer to herself. "That certainly seems to be the case. These reports are all talking about their activities when they had just arrived, though," Jay pointed out, indicating the age of the documents in the box. "You're right, these are too old. We need to see the contents of a newer box." Lexie stood, leaving Jay to put everything back in the box the same way they had taken them out. "Let's see, that box was the one on the far left. This time, let's go with the opposite side and look through this one," Lexie muttered to herself, pulling the box out of the far right door. Jay pushed the box they had been looking through back into its slot, leaving the door open. Lexie looked up as he stepped away from the wall. "No, go ahead and close that one. We can go through everything another time, but for now, we already know that what we are looking for isn't in that box." They didn't have the luxury of going through everything individually at the moment. That would have to wait for another time, one when they weren't being chased. "Right, makes sense," Jay agreed readily, closing the door as requested. Lexie opened the box. Right away, they could see that box was indeed different from the first and was only half full. There were folders filling about a third of the box. The big difference, however, was the 3 guns on the bottom with loaded magazines lying next to them. There was an envelope labeled "Last Will and Testament" sitting cockeyed on top of them. "Well, if there was any doubt before that my parents weren't normal, then this cinches it," Lexie said, picking up one of the guns in a confident and steady hand. Jay cocked an eyebrow at her confident and smooth actions as she checked the gun. "Grandpa takes Tracy and me to the gun range several times a month. He has ever since she moved back in with us," Lexie told him, her cheeks reddening slightly. Although he never shoots anymore because of obvious reasons. That's cool, it's a good thing to know how to do. His eyes turned towards the ground between them. I used to go with my dad, but I haven't been to a range since they died. Jay cleared his throat and looked up. You should see what the will says. Lexie placed the gun carefully back in the box, accepting that he didn't want to talk about it any further. Close the rest of the boxes for now. If this has their will, then this is the newest box. She waited for him to close them before continuing. Sliding the envelope from the box, she broke the seal and pulled out several sheets of loosely folded paper. Clearing her throat, she smoothed them out and began reading out loud. Our dearest daughter Alexis, she started before Jay interrupted her. Wait, Lexie, he began quietly. That letter is personal. Are you sure that you want to read that out loud for me to hear? She nodded. It's all right if you hear it. Lexie insinuated, looking at him carefully. Clearing her throat once more, she started reading before he could respond. Our dearest daughter Alexis. If you are reading this, then we have undoubtedly died and left you alone. We can only hope that your Aunt Tracy and Grandpa have taken care of you in our absence. It is likely that we have died in the course of our duties, and if that is the case, then there are several things that you should know. First and foremost, we are sorry that we are not there and have not been there for you. Your mother and I love you more than anything, but what we have uncovered during our time here in France is bigger than anyone could have imagined. We were approached by a man shortly after we found out your mother was pregnant. He was an upcoming Senate appointee who had discovered something disturbing, possibly world-changing. When we reported this to our superiors, we were told to stay in position and under cover. I am hesitant to provide the full details in this letter of what we found, but know that everything is in the reports. We have accepted his request to take in and care for his son at the time of this writing. He is only a little older than you, and so, to disguise what we have done, we concocted a story that he is actually my child, through an affair I had before you were born. Please know that this is false. I have always been true to your mother, and even having to live with this lie pains me, more than you can imagine. His name is Nathan Alizare. His father, Pascal, is an honorable man. Lexie stopped reading as she looked up at Jay. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears, while her cheeks were wet with the countless others that had already fallen. Do you know what this means? Lexie asked Jay. Your name is Nathan Alizare, and your father, he was indeed a part of the government like John and Renee thought. She choked out thickly. Jay sat silently in shock. We know who my parents are now. Your grandpa was wrong just like we thought. Jay said, his own voice heavy with emotion. Finally he had a name, not a borrowed name like before, but one he had been born with. More than that, he now had the name of his father. If he wanted, he could look him up and maybe even go and see him. Jay swallowed, his throat suddenly tight and full. What else does it say? Lexie scanned the rest of the letter quickly, before flipping to the other pages. Mainly it says that they hope I am doing all right, and that I grew up well and safely. That no matter what happens, they love me and want the best for me. The rest of the pages are just their official last will and testament. Lexie slowly folded the pages and put them all back in the envelope, before holding it to her chest tightly. Her shoulder shook as she silently cried, fresh tears wetting her cheeks anew before falling soundlessly onto her arms.